Sound check. Benita, Celine, yep. Emily, thumbs up from you all. Thank you very much. Any apologies? No, full house. Fantastic. Moving into item number 4 already, the confirmation of policy planning minutes for February 2020. Taking it as read to confirm the minutes, noting the recommendations there. Do we have any changes, modifications, comments? Okay. Do I have a move, please, Grant?
Yeah.
Seconder, Neil. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? There are none. Item number 5, Mana Whenua engagement strategic priorities. I understand Finbar's not well today, so Steve, you'll be taking us through this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and obviously apologies from Finbar, he's away on leave today. Look, this paper was timely given there are a number of issues which the Council has been aware of for some time coming through different, albeit on different streams of work in relation to engagement with Mana Whenua. And so a lot of those issues are coming together this current calendar year. And so we thought it timely to really try and provide a paper for you to summarise those processes that are happening and just remind you again of the broader statutory context within which we work. And again, I think really, really helpful to think about what are the opportunities that these different streams of work present to the Council to strengthen its engagement with Mana Whenua and seek their input into the work we do, as indeed we do seek input from a range of stakeholder groups in the community to support the work of Council. And obviously the different pieces of legislation there are covered briefly for you, including the Ngāti Maru Settlement Act, which again was passed in 2022, which links very closely with the Waitara River Agreement, Waitara Lands Act, which has been, again, Council has been briefed on that in the past. Those two pieces of legislation have a high level of overlap in terms of governing the arrangements for management of the Waitara River catchment. And we're also expecting, of course, particularly with the Monga legislation being recently passed through Parliament earlier this year, and the creation of the new governance entities, Te Tōpuni Kokorangi and then Te Tōpuni Ngāraru, who are in themselves become a separate iwi authority, and so we'll have, you know, some, given the Mongas included within the catchment, we'll have an interest, I expect, in the work of around the Waitara River Committee arrangements and water issues more generically, as well as other issues right across the region. And again, important to recognise that legislation doesn't limit the boundaries of the Monga to just the Monga of a national park. There is, in fact, I think, no definition, so it spreads arguably throughout the whole region. And given the Monga's significance to the region, not only for Māori, but the community generally, arguably that is a very appropriate way of recognising his mana and his importance to the region as a whole. So look, I think we've really important range of opportunities there, and really looking just to bring to Council's attention the work that we will be looking to progress with iwi and hapu and others over this calendar year as we work through these different agreements that need to be put in place and the work that we have underway. So look, with that brief introduction, happy to take any questions.
Through you, Chair. Firstly, Steve, thanks for the report. And you just addressed one of my questions, number D, around Wonga. But I've just got a question. It's just gone through the nominations for the governance board. That's right, and they haven't been picked yet. So they haven't set a strategy or anything like that. So I guess my question is why are we front-footing this at this such an early stage when we actually don't know what that governance board is actually looking at and the engagement? And I hear what you just said, and it does make me a lot more comfortable down the line. But I guess number E, where it's got in the report, it's got what may replace the RMA. We actually don't know what that actually looks like. There's no replacement act yet. So I was just wondering why that's been front-footed. But what's the urgency for that one? Understand D, but I really struggle with around the RMA. And what is the actual urgency around that? Shouldn't we be waiting until we see what the replacement act is and what it actually looks like?
So two comments. Firstly, the legislation, the Resource Management Act, remains the law of New Zealand present. And this council has obligations under that legislation to meet the requirements, the obligations we have. As we look to what might replace resource management legislation, I would suggest it's very appropriate for this council to have some views on what would it like to see in any replacement legislation. This council has done, and this committee has in the past been briefed on some of that work because we drafted submissions on what we would like to see in the previous amendments that were passed into law and then repealed by this government 18 months ago. Now, absolutely. So this council in the past has had some views on what it would like to see, and I would suggest this council should build on those, but also say, what would we like to see in the new resource management legislation ahead of us seeing what Parliament or the government of the day that's putting the bill forward might think? Because surely we understand what are the issues that are important to Taranaki and its different communities, and therefore what is it that we would like to see in that legislation. And I would suggest that could help us inform the way in which we might respond to whatever's put forward by the government of the day and any submission we may choose to make or not on that issue. So I would encourage us to think about what do we want to have anyway, and certainly at a staff level, we do talk about those issues and we have a number of views that and will feed into and get shared again with you as we proceed through that process. So that's, and look, similar issue to me in terms of engaging with the pupu, the new governance entity for the Maunga. What's our view? What would we like to see that entity doing and what its priorities should be? We do a lot of our work programs get influenced by the Maunga, both and even more so on a day like this. One of those influences very clearly, but actually as well as the physical aspects like rainfall and biodiversity and biosecurity, his importance as a defining feature of Taranaki as a community, not only for Māori but non-Māori. I often hear, I don't whakapapa from Taranaki, but I often hear Taranaki people of all sorts of diverse races reflecting on we're getting close to home when we see the Maunga. So actually a lot of Taranaki has an affinity to the Maunga, not just tangata whenua. So what would we like to see on behalf of those communities you all are elected to represent, want to see those newer agencies do, is again something I would encourage you to think about, and perhaps it's an issue again where your staff could do some more work for you on to help inform what we might take to the table when we start, when that new entity is ready to engage with it, so that it's not just what their views are, but what our views are, and by the melding of the views, hopefully we end up with a set of outcomes that are better for Taranaki as a whole.
got a supplementary
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. That's well explained. I guess just getting back to the one around the RMA, I see the next agenda item. It's got heavily written there a prioritisation about the council's engagement with reforms and limited resources, and I just wonder, you know, with looking at the RMA now and limited resources, is it something that should be just put on the back burner until the RMA Act comes out? Or is it, that's my biggest concern, is that I see that there's a lack of resource here, and yet we're actually wanting to do a whole lot of work, and yet we don't actually know exactly what the Act actually looks like. That's more my concern.
And look, again, I think, come back to my comments about this council has adopted previously some clear views on things it would like to see in replacement legislation for the RMA. I would advocate that a number of those perspectives are still very valid. Rightly or wrongly, this council, along with the 3 district councils and iwi o Taranaki, put their hand up and said, we would like to lead the way on what spatial planning might look like. And we started a process under the Strategic Planning Act that was subsequently repealed. Those issues of how might Taranaki choose to develop in the next 50 to 100 years, and how does the planning instruments of whatever they get called, how might those instruments best support the realisation of that vision that Taranaki communities might have for the long term, get reflected in those instruments? I would suggest are issues that are very topical, very relevant to whatever replaces the RMA. And indeed, we already know that the current government is proposing some form of spatial planning work, probably actually more in tune with the thinking of where this council and iwi o Taranaki and district councils have been in the past, rather than potentially what the previous legislation reflected. But collectively, as a region, we have some views. We have done some work collectively, albeit at limited stages, that starts to express some of those views. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We just need to gather those up and make sure that they get reflected forward, because often it's not actually the instrument that you use doesn't actually make the difference. It's what it is you want to achieve. What do we want in terms of water quality across Taranaki as a whole? Do we have a collective view on what those things look like? Where would we like to see development? What should development look like? You know, I used to work in a district that used to prescribe the colour of the house you could paint in some areas. Is that something we want for Taranaki?
Didn't want it there. So
Where you can't have a pink house because you choose to have a pink house? You know, again, I have some views on the appropriate of that,
we know.
but even practical issues like that community that I used to work for had a view at the time. So those things do not change because the title on the planning instrument changes. So what are those things that are important to Taranaki communities collectively, and how do we take those forward? I would suggest are things we should understand and be ready to express, irrespective of what the planning instrument looks like, because that's why you do those planning frameworks and you do those sorts of documents, is to enable this community to express what's important to it and the direction in which it would like to see development of it. What does its future look like?
So it's the difference between proactivity and reactivity.
Exactly.
And really, through you, Chair, it's just about value extraction for me, making sure that we're aligned with what the Act's looking like. And I get it, I absolutely get it, what you're saying, but it just concerns me that I read in other reports that we're lacking resource. Should we be throwing time into that? That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. I've seen a few hands go up, and Emily's has been up for a while. Does anyone here want to comment first on this particular conversation?
Yes, just
Okay,
briefly. Just I want a blue house, not a pink.
Okay, very good.
Actually, just if Steve would just like to explain what he actually means by the term explore governance arrangements with the other councils, because it could be that there's different views between different people and they might end up by being different.
In the comments I just made, or are you referring to a
I'm
particular
referring to the
paper?
words in the paper here. It's in E, which is to explore governance arrangements.
Oh, this is the issue that again, and the government has signalled this, is that the planning instruments will be at the regional level, which was also a direction being included in the previous legislation, that planning instruments will be done at the regional level. So district plans will be no more. The regional planning documents will be combined with land use planning instruments, and there'll be one instrument covering the region as a whole. The previous legislation contemplated the establishment of a regional planning committee. I think this government has ruled, I think I'm correct in saying that this government has ruled that option out. But so what do we want? What would we want to, given these plans are going, and look, this is an issue we're seeing in a number of proposed reforms, of a move towards regional delivery of services. So having a conversation with the district councils and tangata whenua about, so what are the range of governance arrangements that we might like to have in place? What would work for Taranaki, again, seems it falls into the proactive category.
That's a classic, like with the forestry, isn't it? The different councils have different.
So you know, there is going to be a journey of change here where a lot of those decisions will not rest with the traditional district councils and may not even rest with us. Just because we're a regional council doesn't mean that the decision-making authority, and in fact, under the previous act, the legislative responsibilities didn't rest with the Taranaki Regional Council. They were transferred off to a regional planning committee. So what are the, proactively, what would we like to see? What are the arrangements? How might they work? Our issues seems to me are helpful for us to think about and have some views on, so that we can make sure, or try and make sure, that what we have in mind as being appropriate for Taranaki is enabled by whatever the legislation looks like. If we are clear on what we would like to see, that can inform any submissions that we might choose to make to say, please just tweak clause X, Y, Z, so that it enables our model to work.
So will you have some sort of plan on how you're going to do that? Come through like we have with the water, fresh water.
We did some, in fact, one of the big pieces of work we did in the early stages of that previous regional planning work was working through what those arrangements might look like. And again, you know, Mitchell was part of that process. He may want to make some comments on this, but you know, that sort of thinking is the stuff that we could continue to build on in collaboration with our iwi and our district council colleagues to work out, you know, what are the sorts of arrangements we might like to see, and build on the work we did. And as I said, use that to think about when we do see the legislation, if there is some advocacy we need to do, so suggest some changes, we're prepared to do that so that we can get a model that works for Taranaki.
Yeah, definitely think that there's some real opportunities, as you noted, and the ability to work collectively throughout the region. So the discussion that we had around the first tranche, funding the first tranche approach was a fantastic example of how we could potentially work together with iwi, regional council, and the 3 district councils. There's also the Taranaki resource group that's potentially being set up. So you mentioned the spatial planning opportunity that exists there, and being able to work together to identify what some of those opportunities are as well. I think that in terms of Te Kahui Tupua, I think it's great that it's been noted within this paper. As mentioned, the representatives need to be identified and announced by the 5th of April. Once that happens, things are really going to kick off. So you need to have the operational plan in place, need to discuss contracting opportunities, need to start development around the national park plan for Te Papakura or Taranaki. So these are all, again, opportunities to start being views and a voice into that process. So probably just for me, I think it's a great paper. It gives an idea around some of the priorities that the council is considering. And yeah, appreciate it. I do have another question though, but I'll wait till other questions.
Okay. Just Marley, did you have something to say?
Just on the RMA,
Yes.
you were asked, just a question really, in terms of what was raised about when we do the work. There is a transition period. I mean, the RMA is a big monster, and we're going to have 2 bills replacing it. There's going to be a transition process in that. Do we know? And is that something we should be really working on to make sure happens, rather than rushing headlong into timelines and difficulties?
So again, I'm happy to be corrected, but I seem to recall that the current minister is on record as saying, or as acknowledging there'll need to be a transition period, but it will be shorter than the 10 years provided for under the previous legislation. So in terms of planning process timeframes, that's fast. If it's something less than 10 years, you know, this council has been working on a freshwater plan change, I think, for about 15 years. And so these are processes that are not, and again, in a former life, I was leading an organisation that had district plan appeals outstanding for over 10 years. Some pretty controversial issues, to be fair. So yes, there will be a transition period, but expect it to be very short, relatively short and succinct, and an expectation, well, if it's a statutory requirement, that will have to occur very quickly.
Just a supplementary in terms of that short period is legislated, or is there an opportunity?
Well, it was legislated in the previous legislation, and I anticipate it will be legislated in this legislation, given the comments that have been made by the current minister.
Because it seems to me that that's key. If we're going to get this right, we want transition time, and we need to make sure we get it.
And again, that short time frame makes it all the more important. We are proactively thinking about what do we want for the region, because there are some, you know, just the energy transition issues are hugely significant for the Taranaki economy, which, you know, is obviously an important part of shaping and defining what this community looks like.
And a little bit unique.
And a little bit unique, absolutely very unique. You know, all the more reason why Taranaki needs to have its view, because it's not going to be consistent with anybody else's.
Okay. Emily, kia ora. Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, that's fine. Kia ora. I'm assuming we're still talking about the mana whenua engagement strategy as it's kind of shifted to the next topic. But I really just wanted to show my support for the recommendation. And just a couple of comments, I suppose. The 2 things that keep coming through from the iwi is that we want support for dealing with consent applications, financial support, because it's a massive workload, and also we want more involvement in actual consent monitoring. So just a reminder on that. And I did have one question. It mentions 1 po-tai. Is that correct? Because I thought it was 2, but I might have got confused.
Sorry, I missed what was the question about 2?
It mentions that there's 1 po-tai, but my understanding is that there's 2, Maria and another one.
There used to be 2, but we have dropped back to 1 in recent times by agreement with the iwi authorities.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments? Donna?
Great paper. Really appreciate it and gave me a better understanding after some time. But I just wondered how you see that, like the boundaries of the Maunga region, you know, how it's not defined. How does that work? How do we as an authority, like, and also what do you see as those broader, I think you said broader opportunities? How do you see that?
I think all it means is that the Maunga, the way I haven't given it great thought, but my thinking today has been that is entirely appropriate given his dominance and his status and the way he affects the region as a whole. And actually having it, just limiting the scope of what the authority can comment on, form a view on, and obviously it will be their decision at the end of the day. I think it could be an artificial barrier that doesn't need to exist. Because, the rainfall, we'll just take rainfall. It doesn't stop at the boundaries of the national park. It stops wherever those waterways, when they get to the sea. So actually, how we manage rainfall needs to start, and as we know, it's 8 meters or something, a huge amount, hugely significant amount. They need to have the ability to if we say how do we manage or deal with those issues, we want to talk to the governance entity about those issues. But that's why, again, I think the trying to put an artificial boundary around it somewhere would actually, I think, lead to us to constrained thinking, which wouldn't be particularly helpful.
Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Steve. I also support the report and its recommendations. I think it sets out well the work that the TRC has to cope with over the foreseeable future. But also, I agree that the new entity for the Maunga is going to be vital for the region, and for the TRC to have a close working relationship with that entity can only benefit all of us. So, yeah, thank you very much, Steve, and staff.
Thank you. I'll just jump over to Hawaii. Aloha, Monica.
Aloha, kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really supporting the previous comments and congratulating in particular Finbar on a really comprehensive and explanatory paper, which I think goes into the depth and breadth that the submission that wasn't presented around the Treaty Settlement Bill. This paper gives us that depth and that breadth, and it's just probably a shame about the timing. I too support that really close relationship being established with the Maunga, as Steve said. Mai te tihi ki te moana, so from the peak of the mountain to the sea, everything's affected by our Maunga, and looking forward to the work that will be done. But yeah, in particular, thanks to Finbar and the team that pulled this together. Kia ora.
Just have a question. So definitely support the paper. Appreciate the work that's gone into it. My question is probably more just reflecting back on the discussion that happened at the last meeting. So there were some decisions made around potential review and apology and all that. Just wondering where those are at, because this seems like one part of what was discussed, but not too sure where the rest of that discussion is at.
Steve.
So there's a report on the review coming to the next council meeting on the 1st of April. The terms of reference are basically in final draft or factual final form. I'm just halfway through writing a covering report to attach the terms of reference, which will come to council on the 1st of April to be considered there.
April Fool's Day is a bit of an unfortunate day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could have lots of connotations.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thanks for the update. And in terms of the apology, was that agreed? Where's that sitting there?
So yes, that was agreed, and has been progressed, I think. Fair to say that yes, I met with Denny, and we're probably about halfway through it.
Right.
We've agreed that it's best to wait to see the outcome of the internal review first, digest that, and then we're going to get together again and have another chat.
Appreciate
it. We're working on it, but it's not simple with all of this. We need to actually have a look at that report and make sure we're all happy with it.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, when is the next council meeting, please?
Was that the 1st of April?
1st of April, Tuesday the 1st of April, yeah, unfortunate date, but...
Did you have it?
I might ask for it to be a submitter.
Just have it after lunch. Have it after lunch.
Yeah. Very good. Any more discussion, comments? Broadly, I think everybody's very much in favour of this and agrees with the recommendations. which you can find them all on page 10. Could I have a mover for recommendations A through to F, please?
Happy to move.
Thank you. And I'll second it. All those in favour, please, aye. Against? There are none. Moving on. Government reform strategic priorities, page 25. And Steve, again.
Yeah, look, again, Mr. Chair, this is a paper that's intended to try and provide a summary of the government's significant reform program that is now starting to get into full swing this year. Obviously, with the RMA work featuring quite highly, and that we will, as been said in public domain, as we know, the Minister received some reports pre-Christmas on the direction of that, so we can expect some announcements, and presumably in the not too distant future on that direction. But also a number of other changes to the Local Government Act that work is continuing to progress on, and obviously climate change adaptation work, biosecurity and land transfer, a whole range of emergency management reform, a whole range of reform that is underway, starting to work through the system. And we need to obviously, propose that the council be involved in submitting and advocating for changes where it particularly affects us. But also we are part of a number of national organisations that do form views on these things and submit to it, and we contribute to those working parties, particularly through Te Uru Kahika, which, and again, you'll see us very often. In fact, there's another paper towards the end of this that summarises some work that Te Uru Kahika has been doing in the climate adaptation space. So we also contribute to those groups as well where appropriate to submit on these things. So what this paper is really doing is, again, noting the broad scope of those, the tight timeframes within which a lot of that legislation and consultation processes are happening, and suggesting a degree of where we might prioritise our time, but also understand that, in the areas where we're not necessarily submitting directly, we will rely on and contribute to the national groups through Te Uru Kahika and Taitoa and Local Government New Zealand, who also lodge extensive submissions on these changes at different stages. So again, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions? There appear to be none. So the recommendations are there on page 26, A through to H. Could I have a mover, please? Thanks, Neil. Seconder, Donald. All those in favour, please, aye.
Aye.
Against? None. Item number 7, freshwater implementation march up to page 33, and she's here. Last meeting.
Morena.
I'm going to be in Adelaide at the moment.
Good morning, all. This paper is the regular License Weekly update on how we're going with our freshwater planning. I'll take it largely as read, as we're just continuing, I guess, to work on policy development and science technical work that we feel we've got the direction and need to do so under the uncertainty we're operating within at the moment. But one of the things I did just want to talk you through, though, is under government direction, second page of the report. We are still waiting for government direction in terms of national policy statement for freshwater. But in the last couple of weeks, the government has released their wastewater environmental performance standards, which you'll recall we have had conversations in the past around how those standards may impact on the development of our land and freshwater plan. So effectively, I guess these standards, some of the key points just to point out to you all is that they apply to wastewater network infrastructure, so they're end of source point discharge standards. They're aiming to establish a consistent level of common contaminants in treated wastewater. They've been broken up into, I guess, 4 areas where resource consents are commonly applied for by district councils, and so discharges to water being one, discharges to land, beneficial reuse of biosolids, and then also arrangements for wastewater network overflows. Within each of those components, the standards are further broken down so that they apply or attempt to apply different requirements and sensitivities of receiving environments. So, for example, the standards that apply to discharges to water are further broken down to the type of water body that it may be discharging to. It's important to note that not all contaminants associated with wastewater discharges are covered by the standards. So they are specifically focused on, a few of the key contaminants for wastewater discharges. And the regional councils will still have a role in implementing and ensuring compliance consistent against these standards. And we also need to think about how those other things that the standards don't cover, how they might need to be addressed through our plan. We cannot be more stringent than the standards. So in terms of working through how we address wastewater discharges in our new land and freshwater plan, we can't impose anything that is more standard than the conditions that are set there at the moment. And just as a note too, that the standards do set up consents will be required to be issued for 35 years, and that being the driver of that being providing certainty to long-term wastewater management and investment planning for district councils. So it's that they are quite complex, the standards, and staff are working through what it means for Taranaki at the moment in terms of the current wastewater systems we have, what the parameters are of their existing discharges, how they line up with these standards, and then what it might mean for our future planning for the land and freshwater plan. So we're working through that at the moment to inform a submission. So government are calling for submissions until the 24th of April. And that is outside of regular committee schedule meetings. So we will be circulating that draft submission to everybody here to seek input ahead of submitting it. And then at the next PMP meeting, we'll likely request a retrospective endorsement of that submission. So, and as Steve mentioned before, Duda Kahika are also working on a submission from regional councils generally. So we're participating in those processes as well. So just thought it was worthwhile just drawing your attention to those standards being released, and they will have an impact on the detail of our land and freshwater plan going forward. But other than that, I can take the paper as read. Happy to answer any questions or queries.
Thank you, Lisa. Anybody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some clarity around the standards. You say that council may not impose more stringent standards than the standards. So the standards that have been set, will they lead to an improvement in the environment? They will lead to an improvement.
Through you, Chair, they have been designed to do so. That is the objective, I guess, of the government was twofold, I guess, to make sure that we do seek environmental improvement, but also to provide clear consenting pathways for quite expensive and important infrastructure that our district councils have, and to lift the bar consistently across the country. So what the piece of work we're doing at the moment is to look at whether those standards will seek improvement as to line up with the outcomes, I guess, that our community are desiring through some of the work we've been doing recently. So they are setting a high bar, but we've got to look at what that means for Taranaki in the Taranaki context. I think they have, because they have been broken down into responding to sensitivities and requirements of different types of receiving environment, I think there is, it's not just like a discharge to water, it's a discharge to water. It depends on whether it's into a lake, whether it's in a high sensitivity river or stream, moderate sensitivity. So they have tried, I guess, to break it down to seek improvements dependent on that receiving environment. But I can't answer whether they definitely will. We haven't done that work yet.
Just a supplementary, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just on the way down this morning, I was listening to a radio report and I didn't understand all of it, but the guy was saying there's a difference between median and discharge. So these standards, are they based on per discharge or are they based on an annual review of discharges?
They're a standard that the discharge must meet at its point of discharging. So they're an end point standard, if that makes sense. Just trying to pull them up as to whether they're
at the point
based
of
on
discharge.
annual, at the point of discharge, whether they're based on annual or Sit around, Abby.
Not the first
Then-
debate, was it?
Yeah. Doesn't say whether they're annual or not, but it's,
Yeah.
There'll either be a median or a maximum
Yeah.
or some sort of.
Yeah, 'cause it-
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not-
The guy was saying that that's actually quite useless because, if you have a major discharge was spread out over the whole year, it actually was quite insignificant. Whereas it could be quite significant in itself. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Donna.
I was just, you were talking about some of the contaminants were included, but not others, but you said, how are we gonna deal with them? But we can't deal with them, can we? Because we can't make it more stringent anyway.
that's through you, Chair, that's one of the complexities we're working through at the moment, is we can't set more stringent standards on the contaminants that are in this standard.
Oh.
But for the other standards that are sit outside, so we're working on at the moment through the plan, a set of receiving water quality standards, which are different to point source discharge standards, but things like temperature, ammonia, those kind of things that are in the receiving water environment, we're setting standards through the plan of that. What we've got to work out is how that fits with a standard that these enforce of what's coming out the end of the pipe. So there's a bit of work for us to work out as to whether what comes out the pipe, how that fits with our receiving water quality standards, because we as a regional council still have responsibility of catchment management, and things like cumulative effect and all of those kind of things. Our plan needs to respond to that.
So
So
it's not
there's-
saying you can't bring something else.
No, we just can't, like, if they've set a certain standard for E. coli, for example, we can't come in and say that's not acceptable, we'd like to set the bar higher. We can't do that, but we can set standards for other contaminants.
Thank you.
But there's a complexity there about the relationship between the two that we're still trying to work
Thank you. Emily.
Hi, kia ora. And just acknowledging, Lisa, it's your last meeting, which is very sad, but best of luck in your next work. I just had a comment around the wastewater treatment stuff. So my understanding from all of the iwi here is that we are opposed to direct discharges into water and overflow discharges, and untreated indirect discharges as well. So whether that's to freshwater or marine water. So just really want to push that what we do want is treated discharges to land and a reduction in the input of water from whether it's stormwater or grey water and those kind of things. So that's what I'm hearing is what we want. Just to note.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, we're well aware of expectations of Tangata Whenua around wastewater discharges to water. What these standards don't do is they still enable, whilst they set the standard of what comes out the end of the pipe, they enable the councils to still set the activity status of those discharges. So whether something might be a controlled consent, a restricted discretionary, full discretionary, non-complying, those kind of processes are still set, still enabled to be set by council. The government, though, I think is pretty clear that they don't expect councils to be very too heavy-handed, I guess, on that activities status. But that is still something council controls in writing its plan at this stage.
Okay. Hey, I'm sorry, I just forgot one other thing, just from Te Kauhio Taranaki, that our Potaiwa has resigned. So just to note, her input is not available anymore.
Thank you, Emily, for the update.
Okay. Elisa, anyone else? Done. The recommendations. Freshwater application update still, so there's just one recommendation to receive it on page 33. Thanks, Grant, and thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, there are none. Lisa again.
Okay. This paper, the purpose of this paper is to provide a program update to the committee and to seek endorsement on program timeline for the development of the land and freshwater plan, and also our approach as to how we work with and engage with committee and council in that policy development. So as you're all aware, changes that came in from the government around us not being able to notify a new plan until the 31st of December this year, or upon a new MPS being in place, whichever is sooner. We still don't have that direction. We were hoping to get some level of direction by now from the government around what would be in the MPS-FM, but we're still waiting on that. So what staff have done is we have put forward a few options, I guess, for program timeline for you to consider. And in doing that, we've considered a whole heap of issues that are in the discussion part of the document that have led us to some of the recommendations that we've made for you. I'll take you just through some of them because I think they're important just to acknowledge before I step into the options that are in the paper for you to consider. So when we're thinking about the program timeline for the new land and freshwater plan, obviously the national policy direction and the uncertainty that we operate within at the moment is front of mind. We, as you all know, we are working on what we can at the moment, but the finalisation and refinement of policy options that we're working on for the remainder of this year are really kind of, we cannot really do that finalisation work until we have a new MPS-FM in place. Based on what we understand the government's program to be at the moment is we've assumed in this, the options in front of you is that we will hopefully have that new MPS landed by around August this year. So that will give us some time to really have a look at and reflect on what we've worked up to date and where we might need to do some refinement. The other thing that we've been considering is the desire to maintain momentum. So you will recall last year when we did get the current timeline direction from you all, that there were some pretty key things that were in place for us to consider. So the desire for us to make sure that we are responding to the environmental challenges in Taranaki in a timely manner, the acknowledgement that our plan is old, getting older by the minute, the need that we need to take a long-term approach to seeking water quality and quantity improvements, and also just acknowledging the engagement and involvement we've had from the community in Tangata Whenua and maintaining that momentum. So that's formed a consideration in the programs that are in front of you as well, as making sure we continue that momentum. Around staffing and resource changes, obviously the science team and the policy team are working really closely together. We're a pretty small team in comparison, I think, to other regional councils in both of those spaces. We are reliant on some external support from consultants in those areas. So an assumption's been made that all of those things will continue to be done. We are carrying a couple of vacancies at the moment in the policy team as well. So just, and Fred mentioned that at the last meeting, just acknowledging that that may have an impact on the work output from the team. And then also, because of all of these issues, our science team in particular have had a look at some of the attributes that are in the current MPS-FM, and we've decided to pause work on a few of those. They're listed in paragraph 16. We'll obviously revisit those once we get a new MPS-FM, but given the resource constraints and also the challenges we have around information gathering on those attributes, we just figure it's best to pause that work right now so that we can keep working on other elements. And that is a decision that we're asking for your direction on as well in this paper. Wanted to acknowledge as well that the local government elections, obviously later this year, will have an impact on program 2 in terms of there are a couple of months that we can't access you all in terms of seeking direction through that process, and also just a consideration of any time given to the new council to get familiar with the issues around the table as well. We've factored that into the program. Consultation processes as well have been factored in. We've obviously had, last year we did a very extensive consultation, which has given us a huge amount of really good information and direction that enables us to keep working on what we are. The program assumes that there is potential, I guess, for some broad consultation later this year, but that largely we'll probably be doing a lot of our consultation directly with targeted groups and focus groups and industry bodies and working closely with Tangata Whenua. The program also assumes that when we start to step into the formal consultation periods under the RMA, so the Schedule 1, Clause 3 and Clause 4A consultation, that we're enabling a greater period for those, so at least a 5-week set down for those, and for Clause 3 that we'd assume that would be a broad, all of region, any interested person consultation process at that point too. And then the last consideration I guess we've made is that the engagement with council and committee is really important to us in policy development. So we do have a range of policy development packages that we'll be bringing through to the committee for the rest of this year. But we do acknowledge that the scheduling of meetings and also the need to be able to really engage in open workshop style discussion is of value, and we don't want those things to, I guess, hamper the input that we receive from the committee. So there are recommendations here for you to consider about how we bring those policy discussions through to the committee and what the different vehicles might be for those in this paper as well. So that's just an overview, I guess, of the things that have led us to the options that are in the paper for you to consider. So with regards to timelines, there's 3 options there. Option 1 is to commit to a September 2026 notification. Option 1B is to commit to a consultation clause 3 milestone for March 2026. And then option 1C is not to really set a clear timeframe or program for the staff, but just to instruct us to get on and keep working on things as we are at the moment. Staff have provided the recommendation for option 1B in the report. I think option 1B, what that enables is does set a clear milestone for us to be working towards. And clause 3 consultation is a full draft plan that you as the committee would be happy to send out the door and to seek formal feedback processes on, and that we'd be aiming to do that in March next year, considering all of those other factors that I just mentioned before. But without committing to a notification date, just enables some flexibility at this time for the committee just to see how things land with the government around changes that might occur at MPSFM, and we can revisit that notification date at a later point once we get further direction from government. So they're the options around the time frame. There's 2 options in front of you as well to consider around how we engage with the committee and council. Option 2A is to continue, I guess, with the kind of framework that we have to date of where we bring topics of discussion to you in the committee meetings, but our desire would be to set up some protocols, I guess, to suspend standing orders when we're doing that, so that we can really enable free and frank discussion between staff and committee members, so that we can get some clear direction and support and areas of concern through those discussions. The other option is to set up a separate working group that would be made up of councillor and iwi representatives. That group would sit outside of the committee. It wouldn't be a decision-making group. It would rather be a group that might enable a little bit more flexibility as to when we can meet, and would provide that same kind of discussion and guidance to occur. And then obviously any important things would always be back up and reported into the Planning and Policy Committee, so that there's that loop of discussions occurring and enabling everybody around this table who might not be in that working group to have oversight and to see what that working group discussion is occurring. The recommended option that staff have provided to you is option 2A. We feel that if we just set up some clear protocols around how we operate within a committee process, that we can achieve a lot of those desires that we're trying to in terms of getting some open engagement and discussion going. It's more transparent, I suppose. It enables anybody who's interested to be viewing the council meeting online or in person. And it also probably provides a clearer link through to our recommendation in terms of time frame, because we know the schedules that we're working to at the moment as well. So they are the options in front of you. The recommendations obviously on the first page of the paper. All of the options are set out in the recommendations, so we'll need resolution from you to identify which preferred option you wish us to go with. Happy to have any questions or...
Thank you so much, Lisa and team, for the memorandum and considering so many different aspects and points of views and scenarios, etc., etc. Anyone got points of clarification or varying or variations of opinion to staff's recommendations? Yeah.
First, perhaps just a question. I didn't really see a lot in here about bacterial quality of these various lakes as such. And just having been around a number of them, I looked at the list, there's about 6, strange enough, that I've actually seen in the last month. And in each case, they seem to have inordinately large numbers of Canada geese in the area. And I just noticed that there is such a big infestation everywhere, including Taranaki Lake, for example. And as such, they are quite polluting, the large birds. And it's another factor which I just wondered, was that a matter which was considered in the Port Leas, particularly as it seems to be much, much more than in the past. So I'll just ask that, and then I'll have another question.
Through you, Chair, I think that might be a question for the next paper. So we might hold that
Right.
question perhaps,
That's
Abby,
fine.
for the next
Okay.
paper.
I just think that it's very difficult to get quality. You've got such flocks doing what they do. And the other thing was, I was just going to say that personally I support the two recommendations that the officers have done. I think that's a good way to handle it going forward. So I'm supportive of that.
Okay, thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned earlier that there needs to be a long-term approach to improving freshwater quality. Define long-term.
Through you, Chair. So the work we've been doing with the community last year around setting long-term visions, they're kind of where we've probably landed is a 30-year kind of timeframe. It's a generational kind of approach. Not all improvements in terms of where we want to be for target setting will be able to be achieved in that generational approach, but that is the starting point, I guess, for seeking improvement. There may be some areas that need to be beyond that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make an observation. I'm mindful that this council has been going for a number of years, which I guess is generational, and yet we're still looking at a generational improvement in water quality. I'm not sure what this council was doing before this. That's just an observation, Mr. Chairman, that if we still need 30 years to come to grips with freshwater quality, and we've already had, 30 odd years to do it, just beggars belief where we are. But look, I appreciate your work and I support the recommendations. I'm just a little confused as to why we haven't already got on top of it. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To reply to that, Mr. Chairman, I think the level of water quality improvement has been exponential. But as we all know, there's still more to go. And that's really, it's a journey that you've got to travel. Yeah. But we've come a long way.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments in regards to the memorandum and the options and the recommendations?
Just for me, to fully support the recommendations for the 1B and the 2A options, and just keen to get this moving as fast as possible in the parameters we're stuck with.
With that in mind, Emily, would you like to move the recommendations?
Yeah, happy to.
And those two options, 1B and 2A.
Yep.
You seconder, thank you, Donna. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against. Okay, moving on. Now we're talking about lakes, Neil. Abby.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask Brooke and Amira to come and join me. Brooke leads our freshwater and coastal team. Amira is our lake monitoring and research scientist, so she leads our lakes program. It is quite a complex piece of work, so I'll ask Amira to take us through it with some detail, if you'll indulge us, and we have to move to questions after that.
Just a point,
Just
Mr.
dumb it
Chairman.
down a bit.
Yeah. Could we have some plain English, please? Because I really didn't understand most of what was written. That'd be appreciated.
We'll do our best.
You're in good hands. Through you, Chair, I will summarise this report. Under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the Council is expected to set target states for where we would like our health to be in the future. But understanding the past condition of our lakes is vital for understanding realistic goals for us to aim for. So this paper summarises a report conducted by the Forefront Institute on Taranaki lakes. They looked into the past condition of our lakes using 3 different methods. But before I get into these methods, I just want to make it clear that each of them hit a suite of issues that lead to some uncertainties, so results should be interpreted with some caution. The first method estimated reference lake conditions through estimating reference stream conditions. The results from this are displayed in the first figure in this report, and it shows that for total phosphorus, under 50% of lakes were within band A. For chlorophyll A, 22% were in band A, and for total nitrogen, no lakes had estimated levels within band A. The next method used a reference site approach. So for this, they took a few different components, including how native, pristine, diverse, and resilient a lake ecosystem is, to determine what is called ecological integrity. So through this system, they were able to determine which lakes had the highest ecological integrity. So which ones could be considered close to reference conditions or past conditions. They also used some sediment cores to figure out the reference conditions. And they did this for 3 different lake classes: shallow lowland lakes, deep lakes, and brackish lakes. From this, they created different tiers for shallow lowland lakes. So for tier 1, that is the most unimpacted lakes, so closest to the past conditions. And tier 2 lakes are lakes that are slightly more impacted, but they are still in relatively good condition. For tier 1 shallow lowland lakes, the findings actually indicated that reference condition thresholds for total nitrogen and chlorophyll A achieve NOF band A, but for total phosphorus, these achieve NOF band B. And for tier 2, the lakes are expected to fall into band C for total nitrogen and total phosphorus, but still remain in band A for chlorophyll A. The final approach that was used in this report was using sediment cores collected from several of our lakes. I won't go into the specifics about each of the lakes and the transitions throughout time in the summary, but overall, the results showed that the reference condition for the more shallow lakes that were sampled were more mesotrophic or oligotrophic to mesotrophic.
What does that mean, please? What does that mean?
Meaning that they have slightly elevated nutrient levels. And that means they're likely in band B rather than band A. So they weren't in necessarily like the pristine condition, well, just thought of as the pristine condition when you look at things like the MPSFM bands. I would also like to point out the unique nature of Lake Taranaki. So this surrounding area has gone through some changes, but the forest has remained relatively intact. But we still saw a decline in water quality. And this was mostly thought to be because of the presence of the introduced European perch. So perch are quite efficient predators and they're efficient at consuming zooplankton. So this in turn means that there are less zooplankton to eat phytoplankton, which means that you get these like large phytoplankton and cyanobacteria blooms. So overall, these different methods of understanding lake reference conditions did generally align with each other. So shallower lakes did tend to have higher nutrient levels than deeper lakes and may not necessarily translate to band A for those attributes that were focused on in this report, like nutrients. So that is important to keep in mind when we will begin to set targets. But even with understanding these reference conditions, there are uncertainties associated with the methods used. It is also important to understand that aiming for reference conditions might not be realistic due to some of the irreversible impacts on our lakes.
Aiming for what conditions?
So reference conditions. So that's kind of the conditions that they were thought to be in originally before human impacts. But from here, the council will use this information and to assist us in setting targets for our lake attributes, while keeping in mind the uncertainties from these methods, climate change predictions, and what may be realistic in the future. I'll take the paper as read, and we're happy to take some questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Well done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any questions? Okay, Lake.
Yeah. I was just thinking again about this animal pollution, which is one thing, and whether anybody thought of DNA and other things to check exactly what the cause of some of these things was. And the second thing is obviously a big factor in some of these lakes is just the fact that they don't have much flow at all. If you look at Rotakari, for example, that is fairly much stagnant from evaporation versus any discharge out. And the lack of water in the system is some of the problems. And indeed, some of these other lakes you've mentioned here too also have a problem with the fact that they don't discharge very well. And the other one, even Rotarangi, the water tends to go over the top and you're left with a lot of water down the bottom that's just the same. So does this cover those sorts of aspects of it? Because some of those sorts of features may be a way in which we can actually improve the lake without some of the other thoughts that we might have about it.
Through you, Chair. Yes, so some of our lakes don't have what we call like a low residence time, which means that water is in there for a longer period of time. And that is something that we'll need to consider when setting targets. So things might take a bit slower than a lake that has like a lot of different water coming in and coming out at the same time, meaning that the nutrients will be flushed away.
Yes. I was just wondering whether included in the thinking might be some efforts to try to get more water to go into some of the lakes.
Through you, Chair. Yes, possibly. So that's kind of the next step, is to think about possible restoration projects and the balance of like what will be efficient in helping this pollution, but also making sure that the ecosystems are kept intact as much as they can be.
And the other issue just raised is wildlife. I mentioned the Canada geese down south. And of course, you've always had the trouble in North Taranaki with one particular lake, which is always polluted by seabirds and other things. Are you doing any thoughts on DNA identification? What actually is the problem in some of these cases?
So this report tended to focus on like trophic level index, which was more things like nutrients and chlorophyll A, things like that. So there hasn't been too much done in terms of how it was in the past for like the amount of like Canadian geese.
Just to elaborate on that through your chair, so a COLA generally we use as an indicator for human health, so that would be something we'd be thinking about if we were looking at the effects on swimmability. For example, this particular piece of work was looking at it more from an ecosystem health perspective. So what we were looking at was nutrient levels and as Mira said, the trophic level index of those lakes. So what was the condition of those lakes naturally at their inception or in the past, and how realistic is it for us to get back towards that, and for us to be able to start having that conversation? We needed to know what they were to start with. So this is just one piece of work that would need to then be brought in with a number of other pieces of work to look at specific lakes and what would need to be done in those situations. It started talking about some of the issues like the introduction of pest fish or perch, and what the impacts that those sorts of things have and continue to have on lake health. But my observation, I guess, of lake restoration programs is that they need to be developed lake by lake, and they need to be supported by a significant amount of science and investigation. So That's a very much a long-term aspiration. It's not something that we can develop within the next year or two in the lead up to releasing a new plan. So what we are hoping to do is at least start to develop some realistic targets, I suppose, for lakes, given we don't know a lot about them. We've only just recently started monitoring them.
I don't want to prolong anything, but obviously sediment is another issue because you end up with a lot of those lakes having in smaller areas by the fact that there's weed and other things going right further and further into the lake. In some cases, the birds seem to be walking along the top.
Yes, correct. So lakes are very vulnerable to both the inflow of nutrients and sediment. If they're not flushing or well flushed, they tend to build up over time, and that changes the dynamics that happen within the lake and things like the cyanobacteria and algal growth and things like that. So while our rivers might be fast flushing, our lakes are not. So it's something that we need to think about quite carefully as we move through target setting and whatever actions need to be developed really to support their ongoing health.
Emily, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just this was a fascinating report. Very heavy and quite hard to understand some of the stuff, as Peter mentioned. But yeah, just sad to see the results, but not totally surprising. My comment really is just it'd be really good to share this report with all of the iwi and any hapu, particularly in the areas of these lakes that had the in-depth research. Because I mean the pollen records and things like charcoal, this is really useful information for our people. So if that could be action, that would be awesome. Thank you.
So happy to take that as an action and to follow up. We're happy to come and talk to any group or community group or iwi and papu about the results of this. We've also got a report coming a little bit further down the track around some of the sediment coring that's been done in our estuaries as well. So they do yield a pretty in-depth amount of information about the history of those catchments and receiving environments and things that have gone on over time that, beyond our lifetime. So really, really interesting.
Great.
Thank you.
We'll take that as an action point. Barley, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, difficult to get through. I'm just thinking aloud here, but what I'm hearing is what we're trying to do is to establish some reference conditions, what the conditions of the lake are. And you're saying that's a bit of a shot in the dark a bit. You've got some general ideas, but we don't know enough. And you're going to use those to set targets. And those targets will presumably have some implementation plan. So the question, I suppose, is, I'm assuming that as we get more information, those targets may change because we'll learn more. And how does that work in terms of the monitoring? Are you resourced to go back and do the monitoring? Because it seems to me getting information on an iterative basis is important. So is that in the plan?
That's a great question. So yes, things may change as we develop our understanding and knowledge of these lakes as time goes on. So that's something that we'll need to be thinking about quite carefully as we go through target setting and setting action plans and so forth. So generally, any sort of restoration program or management mitigation of lakes takes quite a period of time. It's not something you generally achieve over a 10-year plan.
So we'll be going, I suppose the question is, we can do this now. We need to be really careful about monitoring, and that can slip off the resourcing cliff quite easily.
Yeah, so there's two things. One, we definitely need to have the ongoing monitoring, but we also need to probably have some agility, I guess, and whatever boundaries or targets or actions we set, so that there's some ability to adjust those as we get more information.
Peter.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, look, please help me out. I was going to ask a simple question so that I'd understand where we're at with the lakes. Are they good, not so good, or bad? But I'll change that a little bit. Are they drinkable, swimmable, or no go?
So in terms of swimmable, we have a monitoring program called Can I Swim Here through the council, and it might vary like week to week. So to look into that, there's the Harbour website, and that shows some of the main sites that we monitor, so people can have a look to make sure that the E. coli levels are okay and the same bacteria levels are okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I can probably add to that through your chair. So generally, E. coli levels in our lakes are pretty good. So generally what happens is when E. coli gets into lakes, UV tends to get rid of that quite quickly. So in that regard, they're generally swimmable, but cyanobacteria blooms can be a problem at times throughout summer in some lakes. So at times that can be an issue. Yeah. Drinkable, I'd always recommend treating water regardless of where it comes from.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's a really good discussion and obviously great report, and thanks for well done. And the recommendations is there to receive it. Have a mover, please. Grant, thank you. Seconder. Thanks, Alan. All those in favour, please. Against? Yeah, okay. Item number 10, Tiura Kahi.
Right, so I have two papers to bring. The first one is really setting some context and introducing you to a program of work that's being undertaken by Te Kahika for the regional sector around climate adaptation and the development of a work program around that. And the following paper is really more focused on our actions here in the region. So we'll start with Te Kahika. So we've already discussed, I'm assuming everyone knows that Te Kahika represents the regional councils. It's our collective of scientists and policy analysts and people across the sector that come together to work on things as a team. So we spoke earlier about resourcing pressures. This is one way that we can help address that and help get things done without relying on, the 16 individual councils to do it. Climate adaptation is just one of the focuses of our regional council chief executive. So, among other things, biomanagement's a big focus, transport, RM reform's another one. So we've touched on some of those today. And the program for climate adaptation has really been brought to the fore out of the back of the recent extreme weather events, severe weather events that were experienced up north in the last couple of years. So what that's highlighted is that we have some risks and some vulnerabilities as regional councils in that space, and that there is some advantage in us working collectively together to help address some of those. So particularly in areas of information gathering and support and things like that. So what we've done is we've set ourselves a bit of an action plan that sets out some targeted areas that we want to focus our work on initially. And the 4 areas that we're focusing on currently are improving community resilience, which is really responding to the review of our civil defence and emergency management system that's being undertaken by government. And Ngā Kairapa are also working with the sector to look at specifically impacts on tangata whenua. We've got co-investment to protect infrastructure, which is the utilisation of the Regional Infrastructure Fund to look at flood management improvement. And there's been some significant investment and also looking at some new investment in that area across the regions to improve that. We are working closely with MFE around the climate adaptation framework development and informing that. And then there's a piece of work around building resilience in our land and water space, but particularly supporting ecosystems. To do that work, we're also putting some energy into some of what we call critical enablers. So this is things like our data and evidence, building sector capability and capacity, and making sure our communication is consistent where it is of interest to the wide sector. So always acknowledging, of course, that different councils will have different things going on and different things within the regions that need to be spoken to individually. But where we have got similar streams, we do progress those together. So I've spoken about the infrastructure investment, 102 million that's already been secured, and there's another round of that currently underway. There's some work around asset management, supporting councils in developing our asset management tools and standards, which is something that Taranaki Regional Council has yet to embark on, so that will help support us in that. The development of the climate adaptation framework I've spoken to, that's currently underway. And we're also doing some work as a sector looking at things like flood insurance and litigation risks, so how do we respond to those. We have also been engaging with GNS and others around the development of a new natural hazards and resilience platform, which is providing research and information and things through to the wider country around our natural hazards and how we manage and respond to those. So yeah, this was just really an opportunity to introduce you to the work that's going on there, and I'll talk in a minute about how we might leverage that a little bit in terms of developing our own regional response. So I'll take that as read. And any questions at this stage?
Questions? Yeah.
One question here, and that is, Mr. Chairman, I felt there was one area that seems to be missing from this, and that is the economic aspect of things. Now, what I mean by that is there would be actions that we don't want to get into the whole business development kind of thing. But on the other hand, there is the best way to get people to do anything is to actually give them an economic reason for doing it. So in some ways, if you'd like to think about it, say a particular industry, and I'm thinking of honey and so forth, if in fact we were encouraging native areas of Manuka, that's just an example, not really that I want us to do this, but if this is all about regulatory kind of things that we do, and good intention kind of things. But I'm also a believer that we ought to be looking at climate change to see if there are ways which we can encourage people to do stuff because it's economically advantaged for them to do it. It may not just be that, like in the case of farm examples where there's now customers overseas who make demands, and you mentioned this kind of thing, but actively looking to see whether there are things that we can do that will encourage people to do stuff which improves the situation. And I just think we must, it's not just goodwill that counts, it's actually appealing to people's base tendencies.
All right, I will do my best to respond to that through you, Chair. So the economics are certainly in the front of our minds as we work through this work program. So yes, there is some regulatory aspects to it and legislative aspects to it, but a lot of it really is around, our infrastructure and our flood management and being able to respond to the issues that are most pressing for our communities. So, the economics are key to that, and I guess there's always opportunities in addition to risks that come with climate change that we might want to be thinking about. I think Steve might want to add to
just
that.
perhaps contribute to that. The sorts of economic issues that Councillor Walker's talking about really fall in the mitigation work stream rather than adaptation. This paper is about work that's happening at the national level in relation to adaptation, not the mitigation piece, which is where things like forestry and ETSs and all those things will actually get considered in there. But having said that, the economics are incredibly also part of this, particularly when you start talking about the infrastructure, the very significant infrastructure base that the regional sector has in place right across New Zealand, much more limited in Taranaki, but very significant infrastructure that is protecting existing oak communities. And obviously what we're also finding out economically is there is a risk with that. You build something to protect it, there is a risk if you don't quite get it right. And of course, we'll always find that bigger than design events and things move on, and as climate change continues, the risks and the scale of events is changing. Therefore, there is a risk, which is where the insurance litigation stream becomes very tangible, and economically you'd say, don't go there. And yet that doesn't solve or mitigate existing development that time has shown actually is probably located in the wrong place. You wouldn't allow it to go there today. So actually that also then leads you into the future planning of, and a bit of our discussion about RMA and spatial planning, how do we avoid development occurring in the wrong places, given it needs to be there for the very long term, you don't move it easily. Very real significant economic issues at play there that do need to be built into this work stream, as well as the mitigation work stream. There's a completely separate bundle of work.
Thanks, Steve, for that, and thanks for bringing it up, Neil. I'll just jump up to Emily.
Yeah, Kia ora, I've got a similar comment actually. I think the economic and the social issues need to be considered in also that adaptation situation. And I'll probably talk about in the next agenda topic, but it's really around things like the future of agriculture is going to be very different quite soon when we can't import and export products because we don't have fossil fuels and these other issues are going on. And I mean, for Māori, what I'm seeing is there's a rise and encouragement of people to be moving into the rural areas to be, growing and creating what we need to be climate resilient. And that really needs to happen across the country, across the region of Taranaki. And so it'd be really good to see that built into these plans that, rural areas are going to look quite different quite soon.
Abby?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess within this, as Steve said, it's very focused on adaptation. There is a piece of work in there around land and water resilience that might touch on that, but I think you're right. It's probably something that we want to pick up as part of the next item in terms of what the impacts are in Taranaki. So,
all right, and then we'll jump in. Thank you. We'll jump into the next item. I will move that we receive the memorandum. Could I have a second, please? Thank you, Neil. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? There are none. Okay, so climate change strategy review, page 168. Here we go.
Thank you, Chair. So some of you who were around about 4 years ago might recall that we developed an initial climate strategy and action plan at the time. And then over the last 4 years, we've had some sort of significant changes, both in terms of legislation and the broader national picture, but also, I think, as I spoke to earlier, those severe weather events, which have really brought these issues to the fore. We've had a look at the strategy with Tonkin and Taylor's help and have, while it's got some useful things in it, and there's been some things that we've been progressing through, what we've recognised is it's really no longer fit for purpose and it's not the right document to take us forward into the future. So what we're seeking to do is to take the work that we're currently doing, which is developing a risk assessment for the council's assets and activities, and then leveraging that to inform the development of a new strategy and roadmap or action plan going forward. So that's really about the guts of that. I might leave it at that and just go straight to questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with Barley.
Can I just make an observation? Maybe the last one, but I'm just interested in terms of the adaptation discussion, and I think the enormous cost that's coming with climate change and how we deal with it. Is that thing called managed retreat? In other words, I think it was mentioned before, actually accepting that building fortifications against climate change is not economic and we need to retreat. Is that part of the plan? Because that's a huge issue, huge cost issue down the track. And can I ask my second question, because it's sort of related around the insurance industry versus and government support in terms of dealing with that? It's a bit of a mess at the moment. So where are we going with that?
So through your chair, the current strategy we've got doesn't really deal with adaptation per se. So it was very focused on mitigation and education of the community around climate issues and what they meant for us. The new strategy would very much touch on those more of those adaptation focused issues. Managed retreat is one of a number of different approaches that might be appropriate, but at this stage that's still something that would need to be investigated as we move forward. And apologies, can you remind me of your second question?
I was just, it was a general comment around it. it's a national issue, really, I suppose, in terms of the insurance issues and how, we're being forced into self-insurance because the insurance costs are going up. And that, I suspect, long-term, not tenable. What are we going to do about it?
Perhaps I can help Jen here, given this is an issue of ongoing discussion at the national level. One of the pieces of work that government has underway at present is the development of some proposed recovery setting, policy settings. How will government respond in the case of the next Cyclone Gabrielle? What will it pay for? What will its contribution be to recovery? If the government defines that by default, everything else falls to the local community, the individual property owners, and the relevant councils, both district and regional councils that often have their own infrastructure, have had a role in allowing those properties to be developed there in the first place, and then in some cases have provided differing levels of protection. So I think the government's pretty clear about it's putting a cap on what it will do. It's a bit like the discussion. So that means, as I said, that the councils and the community and the individuals particularly become the funders of last resort.
So it's a fiscal time bomb.
Some would argue a fiscal time bomb that could well be realised relatively soon in the case of some areas that have been particularly heavily affected. But we need to see where that policy work goes.
Thank you.
And that will obviously have an influence on how individual communities and regions need to respond to those new policy settings once they're announced and decisions made.
Thank you. I'll just jump up to Bonita.
Hilda, just noting that the strategy wasn't formally adopted by council back in the day, can we remember why? And has there been a disadvantage in us not having something that we're actively working on, or is it better now that we've basically got, green fields and can start from scratch? What's been the benefit or not of not having something already in place? But yeah, I'm racking my brain. I'm trying to remember why we wouldn't have accepted something back in the day.
It's a little bit convoluted. So I think initially it went to the Executive Audit and Risk Committee, pushed it back to Policy and Planning, I believe. And then it came to councillors for feedback. And then as Gary was leaving and I was coming in, and I think there was some other changes in transit as well at the time, it's just been not actioned. So while it wasn't officially adopted, what we have been doing is using it as a guide to inform some of the activities that we've been doing internally over that period of time. So it hasn't been wasted, and there's certainly some good work that's already been done in developing it that we can pick up and use as we go forward. But yeah, it was never officially closed off, so it wasn't something that was formally endorsed, which is something we would want to seek to rectify this time around.
Okay, kia ora.
Emily.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the report was really, really good. I was surprised at how good it was. But of course, it's pointed out all these problems with the strategy that we've got, which need really urgent actioning on top of, all the other work that the council is doing is, understaffed and underpaid, underfunded, sorry. I guess just something I want to point out is, again, that the issue around the social and economic troubles that are going to be coming, like that will affect people's incomes, that will affect the rates that come through, that will affect the value of housing and assets and all those things. Like, it's going to get a lot harder. So we need to, just try and really push this up the front of priorities, just because of the all-encompassing effects it's going to have. And just another thing noting around water resilience and that kind of stuff is that wetland and estuary restoration is really important in that situation. Like, particularly at Pariaka, we're trying to make our papakainga climate resilient, and we're really noticing that restoring the wetlands and everything upstream of us is crucial for how we're going to deal with things. And until that happens, and it's very difficult to make happen, we're a bit stuck. And then lastly, just notice on page 181, it talks about how the government stopped taking regional data on greenhouse gas emissions. And they only did it, I think, for a decade. And that's possibly put us into trouble with not adhering to the greenhouse gas protocols. So something to maybe push back on government is that they should be supporting the regional councils to be doing this data collection so that we are abiding by international rules and actually protecting our communities properly. And sorry, just final comment. If you're interested, my climate justice group actually did a strategy plan during the COVID lockdowns, which is online and has been sent to council a few times. So there is stuff in there that you might find useful. It's called the Toitu Taranaki 2030 strategy plan. I'm happy to talk to staff about it if it's useful. Kia ora.
Yeah, Abby's nodding.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that. So we are receiving the memorandum. Thanks for the memorandum, and we're endorsing the proposed approach for drafting a new climate change strategy. Thank you, Donna, and a seconder. Thanks, Alan. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Well done, team. Thanks for your contribution today, your passion, and your input. Now to Taranaki to close.
Benita, you're muted.
Benita's got her hand up.
Oh, Benita, sorry. I didn't see your hand.
Aroha mai.
Apologies.
Thank you, Emily, for reminding me I was muted. Mr. Chair, sorry, just I had an afterthought after the freshwater conversation. At the last hui, I noted my conflict of interest being in the Taumata Arawai organisation. Do I keep needing to note that at every meeting, or does my previous indication of that interest suffice for all future hui?
You should note it when there are items of direct relevance on the agenda, which obviously there were in this case. So we'll note that.
We'll note that.
Yeah, can I please have that noted in retrospect? I'd appreciate that. Kia ora. Thank you. Apologies.
Thank you. Okay. All right, let's go. Out of here to close. And we're here for Sky. Please stay for some food.
Mai ngā the wao, te ngakina, the Wi-Fi, the Wai Māori, a tāne, ngā rongo, ngā tangaroa, ngā mauru, ko rangi nui e tui o nei, ko papatu anu, whakato ake mai. Tū o te tina, 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 tina,